The estuary had always been a place of motion, a world that breathed twice a day. The tide surged in with the ocean's strength, carrying fish and cold salt water deep into the marsh. Then it receded, exposing mudflats rich with crabs, clams and reeds that whispered in the outgoing current. For an otter, the tide was certainty. It marked the hours, controlled the food, shaped the land, but today the tide refused to turn. Koa, a coastal river otter known to researchers by a faded yellow tag, floated on her back in the murky brown surface, blinking at the dim morning light. She expected the soft pull of the outgoing tide beneath her body, that gentle downward tug she had known since birth. But the water lay heavy and unmoving. No outward drift, no inward sway. It held her like thick syrup, dense and strange. She rolled once, diving beneath the surface. The water should have been clearer this early, when the tide drew sediment back out to sea. But below the surface the estuary looked like a suspended cloud, silt, algae and debris floating in place, not rising, not sinking, not swirling. Koa twirled among the reeds, waiting for the invisible current to grip her fur and guide her. Nothing. She resurfaced, whiskers twitching. The air felt as stagnant as the water. Shorebirds stood stiff along the mudline. Sandpipers and herons usually moved constantly, probing the retreating tide for food. But now they seemed confused, picking half-heartedly at the same patch of exposed muck. The water level around their legs had not changed in hours. A heron stabbed its beak into the shallows, withdrew it with nothing, and let out a low, irritated croak. Koa had never heard a heron sound uncertain before. She paddled toward the centre of the estuary where deeper channels normally churned with life. The surface here should have been rippling, the tide pulling water outward, dragging floating logs and old reeds with it. Instead, the water looked like glass coated in brown powder. The smell of rot hung thick, decaying reeds, fish breath, anaerobic mud. Koa dove again, this time deeper. Halfway down, the water temperature changed abruptly, not gradually as the tide mixed layers, but in a sharp line. Warm above, cold below. A boundary that should never have stayed this distinct. Currents normally erased such layers. They smoothed them away like fingers over sand. But the boundary was rigid, unmoving. Koa pushed through it, feeling the cold shock along her belly. Below, fish hovered listlessly. Mullet, herring, juvenile salmon, moving sluggishly in place. They did not dart away as they normally would. Oxygen levels, she sensed, were low. Without the tide, the estuary could not breathe. She surfaced again, anxious. Across the estuary, movement caught her eye. Boats, researchers. 3 small craft floated near the wider mouth of the estuary, equipment blinking, cables trailing into the water. One boat held a large cylindrical instrument, a tide gauge. A woman bent over it, shaking her head with disbelief. "Flat line for 18 hours, she said into her radio, voice tight. "This system hasn't moved since yesterday morning." Another boat operator frowned at his salinity meter. Salt wedge isn't shifting either. The freshwater-saltwater boundary is locked. A third researcher adjusted a sonar scanner. Even suspended sediment isn't settling. The entire water column is static. Static. Dead. Breathless. Koa watched them, her whiskers trembling. She didn't know their words, but understood their alarm. The estuary was wrong. Wrong in a way an otter felt in her bones. Currents missing, sounds distorted, smells unmoving. She slipped beneath a fallen log to rest, but even here the water failed to soothe. In normal tide cycles, wood shifted slightly with the changing water height. This log had not moved in a full day. Mud was already forming around its lower half, gluing it in place. Koa swam toward the river mouth, expecting at least some turbulence there where the estuary met the open sea. But when she arrived, she felt only a faint vibration from distant waves, waves that could not enter the estuary without the tide's pull. The water level at the mouth matched exactly the water level upriver. A flat plane, a locked system. Nature was built on gradients, pressure differences, movement. But here, everything was equal. Equal pressure, equal depth, equal stagnation. Water without change was water dying. A crab crawled awkwardly across the mud near the shoreline. It paused, lifted its claws as if sensing something, then scuttled in a wide arc with frantic energy. The crab could not orient itself. Normally it followed the outgoing tide, feeding where oxygen thinned the mud. Now there was no direction to follow. Koa swam closer. The crab turned toward her and froze, claws raised. Not in defense, in confusion. She dipped her head, sniffing, searching. Her nostrils filled with a thick, warm stench, trapped organic decay that should have been swept out to sea hours ago. She shook her head violently. The smell clung to her whiskers like oil. A strange buzzing sound echoed across the water. Koa turned. On the research boat, an alarm blared. The lead scientist stared at her tablet, eyes wide. Oxygen is crashing. Surface layers suffocating. No mixing at all. If the tide doesn't move soon, we could lose the whole estuary ecosystem. Koa paddled backwards, sensing panic in their voices. A school of mullet thrashed beside her, not fleeing a predator, but gasping near the surface. She dove again, desperate for cooler water. The lower layer was darker now, the cold boundary sharper. No mixing, no churning, no turbulence. Tiny bubbles rose from the muddy floor. Methane, hydrogen sulfide, gases released when oxygen vanished. Sulfur stung her nose. She shot upward immediately, breaking the surface with a gasp. Above, gulls circled restlessly, not diving, not calling, just circling in tight, uneasy spirals. Koa climbed onto a slanted tangle of reeds to rest, her fur dripping brownish water. She scanned the land, searching for some shift, a ripple, a drawdown of water, a smell of exposed mud. Nothing. The estuary had turned into a heavy, stagnant bowl. She looked toward the ocean, expecting waves to push inward. They didn't. The water at the mouth rose gently, almost hopefully, then stopped. Stopped again. Held. The tide refused to enter. The tide refused to leave. Hours passed. Koa slipped into the water again, but even her strokes felt sluggish in the dense, unmoving liquid. Her paws pushed, but nothing yielded. The estuary resisted her movement like syrup closing around her. She could survive currents. She could survive storms. She could survive predators. But still water was death. All around her, life waited for a motion that no longer came. Fish hovering, crabs wandering blind reeds sagging under their own rot birds, pacing shorelines that never changed, researchers radioing frantically, and the tide, anchored in place, ignoring the moon that begged it to move. Koa dove once more, deeper this time, into darkness that seemed thicker than before. Below her, a flat, suffocating silence pressed upward. A silence of water that had forgotten how to breathe, a silence of a world waiting for a pulse that refused to return. Koa swam until her muscles ached, slicing through the thick, unmoving water in slow strokes that felt heavier with each push. Normally, the estuary helped her move. Currents carried her, tides pulled her, water flowed around her body like a living companion. But today, the water clung to her fur, resisting her progress, smothering movement. It felt like swimming through something that wasn't entirely liquid anymore. She surfaced with a gasp, whiskers dripping brown droplets that hung in the air longer than they should. Even gravity seemed sluggish here. The sun, hidden behind layers of marine haze, cast a dull yellow glow across the estuary surface. Usually sunlight glittered across rippling water, but now it spread like paint over a motionless sheet. Every reflection was wrong, too stable, too perfect, too still. Koa shook her head violently, trying to clear the stench. It didn't help. The smell had worsened. Rot, metal, stagnation. The warm, choking scent of dying water. A juvenile salmon thrashed beside her, breaching the surface with a desperate gulp. Then another. Soon dozens of fish were rising, gasping. They clustered near the top layer, oxygen-starved, darting weakly at the surface film. Koa backed away instinctively. Fish never behaved like this unless the water below was turning sour. She dove again to confirm what her instincts already screamed. The cold layer below was darker now, almost black. Visibility dropped instantly as she descended. Silt particles hung motionless, suspended in the water like dust in stale air. Even the smallest plankton didn't drift. At the bottom, a faint glow from sulfur bacteria illuminated patches of sediment, pale yellow, too bright. The mud exhaled quiet bubbles that wobbled upwards slowly, each bubble rising like it had to push through something thicker than water. Koa felt her lungs burn from the smell. She shot upward immediately, breaking the surface with a coughing huff. Her eyes watered. She wiped her face with trembling paws. Even the top layer had lost freshness. She swam toward the river inlet, the place where fresh water pushed into the estuary during low tide. If the tide refused to turn here, maybe upstream currents could offer movement. But as she approached the inlet, she saw the same dead water. Usually the inlet churned with momentum, river water flowing out, tidal water flowing in, meeting in chaotic, oxygen-rich turbulence. But today, the inlet looked like a sealed boundary. Fresh water oozed slowly outward, not mixing, forming a pale line across the estuary surface like oil on soup. She touched it with a paw. It didn't blend. It simply floated, unmoving. Even at the boundary of two worlds, river and sea, the water sat like solid layers that refused to interact. Koa started upriver anyway. Her paws worked harder now, the resistance increasing as the estuary's strange density clung to her fur. The smell changed, less rotten, more metallic, but equally wrong. She reached a shallow bend where reeds grew thick. Normally, this place rustled in the breeze, reeds swaying as tidewater flooded between them, but now they hung limp, tips dipping into unmoving water. Some reeds had collapsed entirely, unable to stand in the saturated, oxygen-poor mud. A kingfisher perched on a branch above the reeds. It stared into the water, head tilted, waiting for movement. But no fish darted below. No ripples hinted at life. The kingfisher dove anyway, out of instinct, a flash of blue and white, and plunged into the water with a muted splash. It resurfaced immediately, sputtering, wings beating frantically. Koa swam closer. The kingfisher stumbled back to its branch, shaking violently, as if the water had burned its feathers. Then she noticed something floating nearby. A thin film of algae stretched across the surface, unusually dark, unusually thick. Harmful bloom. Something that should have been diluted or swept away by tides before it reached this density. But nothing swept anything away now. She backed off. Ahead, near the mouth of the larger river, she saw the research boats again. Their engines idled softly, their crews frantic. A man leaned overboard with a long metal probe, pulling it from the water covered in black sludge. "A noxic layer is rising," he shouted. "It's climbing toward the surface." Another checked a screen. Her voice shook. "Oxygen at 10 centimeters depth is nearly zero. This is catastrophic." The lead scientist pressed his palms to his forehead. "And the tide is still static. The river's outflow isn't pushing the salt layer. We're looking at a complete collapse of vertical mixing." He slammed a case shut. Without mixing, the estuary is suffocating. Koa listened, chest tightening with something she didn't understand but felt clearly. Fear not born from predators, but from the water itself. Her own home was turning hostile. She swam away, deeper into the estuary, where she grew up, where she learned to dive, to hunt, to sleep anchored to drifting kelp. But the kelp now sagged like wet ropes. The eelgrass beds lay matted against the mud, unmoved by currents they depended on to live. Koa dove into the beds anyway, searching for crabs she used to catch here. Her paws brushed mud. No movement, no burrows, no life. She surfaced, heart hammering. A distant commotion made her turn. Fish, dozens, maybe hundreds, were gathering at the boundary between salt and freshwater, crowding near the very surface. Some flipped weakly on their sides. Others lay still, drifting. The water around them darkened further, the surface film growing thicker with each passing hour. Koa paddled backward, frightened. The estuary had become a bowl of trapped decay. She turned toward the sea again. Maybe the ocean still moved. Maybe the tide would find strength to push inward. As she approached the mouth, she felt something like hope, small ripples forming near the edge of open ocean. But they did not enter. They stopped abruptly at the line where estuary water began, hitting the static barrier and flattening instantly. The ocean tried. The estuary rejected movement. The tide, pulled by the moon, reached forward like a hand, but the water inside the estuary refused to respond. Koa climbed onto a floating log, exhausted. Her paws trembled. Her whiskers dripped thick water. Around her, birds circled without diving, crabs wandered blindly, fish gasped at the surface, reeds collapsed into black mud, researchers shouted into radios, boats churned in panic, and the estuary held its breath, refusing to exhale, refusing to inhale, refusing to move. Koa lay flat against the log, staring at the boundary between sea and estuary. The moon pulled. The ocean answered. But the estuary stood still, until the water remembered how to turn, how to rise, how to fall, how to breathe. Koa drifted in a silent world suspended between tides that no longer came.